Hey, it's John Alapic. Welcome back to the show. And today we have our friend from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. You may also know him from the Contrarians, Rock Daydream Nation, Y&T and Friends Vinyl Talk, and so many other YouTube channels. My friend, Mr. Tim Durling, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, we've been talking about this for a while because you've played a part in this.
Yes. And I was privileged to be part of Tim's latest book that came out earlier this month in June of 2026. This is On Record, the April Wine album review. This is Tim's seventh book. You could buy all of his books at Amazon.com. This is his fourth panel book where he got many members. This is the largest amount of members, panel members on in a panel book for Tim. And we all go and we talk about all the songs individually on all the studio albums. So, Tim, this is your fourth panel book. I believe this is you're also your fourth panel book. I believe that's on an artist that up until this point did not have a book about them. Is that true?
Well, there's been like Miles Goodwin, the late Miles Goodwin put out a memoir about 10 years ago called Just Between You and Me, and that's pretty much the story of April Wine from his perspective.
Okay.
Um, but I don't think there's been a book that's just about their music. I could be wrong, but I really don't think there has been. So I think I'm filling another need out there in the rock biographies section that every classic band should be commemorated with a book. And whether I do it or not, somebody should do it. So I was happy to be able to do this for one of my favorite Canadian bands, and actually a band that, unlike any other band that's that's in my collection, that's world, sold records all over the world, they're actually kind of from my neck of the woods. They're from the easternmost part of Canada. So this was a lot of fun, and yeah, I had a lot of great panelists take part. Some are, a lot of returning panelists like yourself, and then there's a few people that have never been in one of my books before. So yeah, I'm really happy with how it came out.
Very good. One thing I gotta ask you though, one thing I found very remarkable about the panel's contributions to this book is you have a lot of contributors who've been with the band from the beginning, and a lot of them are from Canada. April Wine is a Canadian band. They were one of the first Canadian rock bands that really broke open in the States. And I noticed that in addition to a lot of them being with them from day one, you've had some younger fans who are also from Canada and went back and got into the band heavy. And you also have some other contributors who have had a lot of history in the music industry, not just as fans so much, but more having their own fanzines, being authors on other bands and other musical subjects. Do you think having that kind of variety really helps a project like this?
I think that having, the panel books are really a format that I really have come to enjoy. Anyone that's ever read one of Martin Popoff's album by album books, that's where I got this from. The idea of a virtual panel of people sitting around listening to whatever band and talking about songs and talking about productions and what, how far back do you go with this album? Were you there when it came out? Did you discover it later? You're getting all these perspectives, all these age groups, all these points of view. And I find that it's a great way to generate content that I wouldn't be able to generate myself because I have my own biases, my own opinions on what albums I like, what songs I like the best. So it's great to hear these differing opinions. This time around, my process for choosing panelists is if I know they like the band, and are willing, maybe they haven't heard all the albums, but if they're willing to check out a particular album, then that's good enough for me and answer some questions on it. But yeah, I do have this time around there are some people that have never been in one of my books before, and some of them are fellow authors, and I think that's you definitely get another you get different perspectives who no matter who you talk to, but if you talk to people that work with words a lot, you can really tell because it just shows in the answers. They're very well thought out. But everybody as always rose to the occasion here, and I gained some perspective on a lot of April Wine's albums from doing this.
I see that April Wine, when we talked on your channel, they first hit the top 40 with Fast Train
In Canada, yeah, that was their
in
first
Canada.
first
Yes.
Canadian hit. Yep.
And then on their second album, they hit nearly number one, I think number two, I believe, with
Yep.
their cover of Hot Chocolate's You Could Have Been a Lady.
Yeah, and that also was their first US top 40 hit, peaked at 31, I believe, or 32. It was in the 30s, but yeah, they made inroads quite quickly. But yeah, that song to this day is a radio staple and a concert staple, and it's one of their best known songs. They really made it their own.
I definitely agree with you on that. What I learned in this book is that they didn't tour that album.
Yeah, that was an early sort of slip, I think. A combination of management and label. Well, in the case of April Wine in the early days, label and management were one and the same. And you've heard stories about that. It's usually not a good thing. It's usually good to have separate uh, entities for those. But for whatever reason, yeah, they made inroads with that second album, and to break into the States early on, that was the first album that was released in the States. It would have been, I think it would have done them a lot of good to get on, an opening act for a big tour. It could have gotten them on Don Kirshner's rock concert, you know, it could have gotten them on, what was the Midnight Special? I don't know if that was on
Yes.
back then, but yeah, in concert definitely was. So yeah, it just could have given them that early leg up in the States because it is so hard for Canadian acts to break into the States. I mean, up until that point, the Guess Who were a huge success on both sides of the border, and of course, from that spawned BTO. But there was very few uh, Canadian acts that were able to, even famously like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell had to move to the States to get something started. But April Wine never moved. They moved from Nova Scotia, you know, the eastern part of Canada to Montreal, but they
Right.
didn't leave the country. So yeah, they probably should have toured that second album, and instead they went back into the studio and made a third album. Great album, but and that album wasn't even released stateside. So yeah, I think one of the problems is that April Wine didn't sign with a particular like with one label in the US right away. It wasn't until Capitol Records years, which was their seventh album, that they actually signed on one label worldwide, and I think that made a difference.
When I've gone back and listened to some of these earlier albums, and I'm a more of a recent fan of the people who contribute to your book, I'm definitely more in the casual fan category. When I listen to a lot of those early albums, they're quite diverse and they have a feeling of let's throw something out the wall and make it stick. At the same time, there was a lot of eclectic acts in the 1970s. It was at a time when you can hear the Carpenters on the radio, and then you would hear Bachman Turner Overdrive, for example.
Yep.
And they tried a little bit of everything, including doing a novelty song called Slowpoke, which novelty songs were popular here in the 70s. I remember them when I was a very young child. Do
Yep.
you think the fact that they couldn't, what I should ask is, would you say they were trying to find their sound, or do you think they were more like hopping on a trend?
I think they were trying to find their sound, and I don't think they actually found a sound until their fourth album, Stand Back, which is the one. It's, Slowpoke is an outlier on that album, but with Stand Back, that's usually considered their first really, really, really good album. Unfortunately, that's an album that had potential to break in the States, but it just didn't. It was released, but it wasn't promoted. It was on Big Tree Records, which is not a big label at all. And it's a shame. But yeah, I think up until then, yeah, they were, you know, Miles Goodwin, from the second album onward became the primary songwriter.
Yes.
And he had a lot of diverse influences. I mean, he had country influence and he had rockabilly influences and early rock and roll and hard rock, the Beatles, Stones, and then Led Zeppelin and, the Deep Purple. And so it was all coming out. But I also don't think that uh, I don't think they teamed up with a producer that understood what they were going for enough to say, okay, guys, what kind of band do you want to be here? Because you sound like you're like you kind of said, you sound like somebody's dialing through a radio at this
Yes.
point. So it's interesting how it took them quite a long time. And it's interesting how the music industry at that time allowed bands to find their sound
No
and find
doubt.
an audience. Otherwise, there would be no history to talk about because they'd have been dropped after two, maybe just one album. So it's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's what makes 70s getting back into 70s bands. If you hear the 80s stuff, it's what getting back into the 70s stuff is so interesting. It's that discovery of wow, they do not sound the way they sounded when I first discovered them. They came a long way from where they were.
And the fact that they had all that experience under their belts, tried all those different styles throughout their albums in the 70s. I think by the point that they had finally gotten a chance to break outside of Canada, not only did they have their sound down, they were a very tight live units.
Yeah. They had honed that live craft with almost 10 years of touring, touring crisscrossing Canada and playing every size venue, from the smallest of clubs to Maple Leaf Gardens to anything in between, anywhere that would have them, they just pounded the pavement. So yeah, by the time that they got to the First Glance album, which was their first album for Capitol and in some ways their first real worldwide release and started getting on bigger tours in the States, people just thought, how could this new band be so tight and so together? But they were veterans at this point. Most of them, well, no, to some extent, they were all veterans in various bands. They'd had years and years of the grind of playing gigs. So yeah, they just got better and better as a live band. So, and I think maybe that confidence is what informed the sound that would make them, the most popular. That slightly harder rock sound, especially when they got Brian Greenway in the band, and now they had a three lead guitar lineup, and they utilized that to the fullest extent. But yeah, I think you're right. It was the years of being on the road that just they were a well-oiled machine, and they were ready for that worldwide success. They didn't. It's not like they went on stage and didn't know what to do. They were veterans. They were road dogs at this point already.
No doubt about that. And staying on that same topic, you've lived in Canada your whole life. You've been a music fan your whole life. You've been involved in the industry for a few decades now. So music is part of your foundation and your fabric. So if a live band, like a band that's coming around and they're working their way up, what venue would you say what venue do you play before you say I made it? Like here, it's like we played Madison Square Garden. We made it.
Yeah.
What would it be there in Canada?
Well, in Canada, it would probably be Maple Leaf Gardens. I mean,
Okay.
that's probably the most well known. There's in Montreal, there's the It's gone through so many different names. When I saw Kiss there, it was the Molson Center. Now it's the Bell Center.
Okay.
I mean, if you're really, the Sky Dome in Toronto, if sometimes they open it up, right?
Right.
There's a big venue in Vancouver. Why is the name escaping me right now? But yeah, those are the big places that, once if you're a Canadian band and you can headline those places, then you're doing all right.
Okay, very good. Now, they had their biggest hit, interestingly, with a ballad and not a power ballad like Just Between You and Me, but the song was called You Can Dance, If You Can Dance With Me from Forever for Now.
Yeah, that was a big hit in Canada. I think that was a top five single, and that was one of the earliest songs that Miles Goodwin wrote. I think that song was, he probably wrote that when he was 16 or 17. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense because it's like a being dumped at a school dance kind of 50s doo-wop ballad. There's beautiful harmonies in it. I don't want to call it a novelty song, but for them, it's kind of a novelty song. I don't hear it on the radio these days, even though it was a big hit back then. The novelty portion of it comes if you hear the full album version with the verse that's always cut out on the radio, where there's a spoken word part that kind of begs that brings the novelty thing into it. But yeah, that was a big, big hit for them. He wrote that song, and he also wrote the song "Tonight Is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love," around the same time. Those are both big Canadian radio hits for him. So he was, he was just gifted as a songwriter. He could write these simple love songs, and his voice was, he could convey them, and they didn't sound manufactured or cheap. You bought what he was saying. He sang it like he meant it, even though he was almost, he was pushing 30 by the time that he recorded those songs.
You answered my next question with your last answer. I was going to ask you if that huge single, which is kind of an outlier compared to their rockers, did it still get played heavy in Canada? And
I
the
think
reason
it
I was,
did. I think it did, but nowadays, no. They still have a handful of what I'd call radio staples, but for that one isn't one of them.
what was interesting was when I was reading the second chapter, which was on the album on record, one of the panelists said about at least two songs on the album that I've heard them too many times already. And would you say that there are several songs by April Wine at this point where like do they like okay in the United States, I love Rush, but I can't listen to Tom Sawyer anymore. But I love it. But there's certain songs that you've heard so many times. April Wine being a Canadian institution, would they have a lot of songs that you would say a lot of people would say are played out?
Some might. There are no April Wine songs that I hear so many times that I'm sick of them.
Okay,
I actually never get sick. I don't think I can get sick of Tom Sawyer, but I know what you're saying
excellent.
because I feel the exact same way. And I'm a huge Journey fan. I cannot
Hmm.
listen to Don't Stop Believing anymore. I can't.
Me too, and I love it.
It's
But
it, it's
yeah,
it's been played to death. It comes on. I'm like, sorry guys, I got to change it up. With April Wine, I think that for the most part, they were never a band that had like hourly play. You know what I mean? Like they never had a point where it was just like, oh my goodness, enough April Wine. I don't think, unless it was like the 81 when the Nature of the Beast was hitting really big. But even then, I don't think there was ever a point where there was uh a saturation. What you had is a band that was very popular, sold a lot of records, and did very well on tour. And they did have songs that radio responded to, but they had a lot of them. So I don't think there was there isn't one or two that just get beaten to death. I don't think. Um, and I know that in the U.S. it's different. If you hear April Wine, it's probably Just Between You and Me, or maybe Sign of the Gypsy Queen, or maybe Roller. Now,
yes.
those three songs are certainly popular up here, but You Could Have Been a Lady is a radio staple. What a Night is a radio staple. Tonight is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love is a radio staple. I Like to Rock is a radio staple. Enough is a radio staple. There's a lot of them. So I don't think they ever got to that oversaturation point, if you know what I mean. I don't think they ever got that. point where people were like, I'm done with this band now. They had peak in popularity, yeah, like everyone does, but I don't think they ever had that, like, I'm going to use an example of somebody that sold way more albums than April Wine, but say Bryan Adams, for example. And I'm a big
Okay.
fan, but Reckless had six big hit singles off it. He was everywhere, right?
Yes.
He came out with Into the Fire, and Heat of the Night was a big hit. Then he puts up, I think, one of his best singles, Hearts on Fire. That's one of my favorite songs of his. And I think it got to 26 in the States.
It did.
I just think the saturation point was there. It's like, we don't need any more Bryan Adams singles. I don't think that ever happened with April 1.
Okay, you just popped an idea in my head here. Bryan Adams is an artist here in the States where he had a lot of hits on the pop stations and he had a lot of songs on the rock stations. Just an album like Reckless, for example, you're going to hear Kids Wanna Rock on Rock 107, our AOR station here, but you're going to hear something like Heaven on the pop station.
Mhm.
Was it similar for like that for April Wine in Canada?
Yeah, I think so. I think they straddled that line because, you know, from the same albums, there would be different types of songs, right? So,
Hmm.
the rock stations say take an album like Stand Back, they'd be playing What a Night, maybe Don't Push Me Around. The pop stations would be playing Tonight is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love, I Wouldn't Want to Lose Your Love. They'd be playing the
Okay.
ballads. So, but maybe the rock stations were too, just not as much. But yeah, they were able to do that. They could do rockers and ballads in equal measure and do them both equally well. Now, when they got more popular at the turn of the 80s, the emphasis was more on rock, even though Just Between You and Me was a big hit. Even still, as I like to say, there's no acoustic guitar, there's no piano or keyboards. It's just pure electric guitar. So, yes, it is a ballad, but it is most definitely a power ballad at a time when that term had not come into common usage. So, it didn't sound out of place on a rock station. But then, certainly, Sign of the Gypsy Queen was just a massive rock hit. And it did make inroads on the pop charts, but I think it peaked at 57, which kind of speaks to his
Correct.
popularity. It's a pretty heavy song for 1981. Um, but yeah, the emphasis was more towards rock, but Miles never stopped writing those ballads. It's just the Outlier album in that period is harder, faster because there are no ballads on that album, which kind of make it that's kind of unique in that catalog. So there's usually at least one.
You mentioned Nature of the Beast. Let's talk about that. Another idea that just popped in my head now. In my opinion, 1981 was a fantastic year for rock music,
Oh,
especially
yeah,
hard rock.
especially Canadian bands. Because I always say April Wine, Rush, Loverboy, and Triumph all had their biggest albums in 1981. It's just a weird coincidence.
So would you put Number of the Beast in the pantheon of those great albums that you mentioned, along with Don't Say No or Foreigner 4 or Journey Escape,
Absolutely.
Paradise Theater?
Absolutely. I think it holds up. I like the fact that it was a million seller in the States, but I think it should have sold more. Especially,
Okay.
with if you look at the Spotify plays, Sign of the Gypsy Queen and Just Between You and Me, I think get a fair amount of Spotify plays, which always brings me down the road is like if it was re-audited, you know, would it be a 2 million selling album by now? I don't know. It took Triumph's Allied Forces um like 22 years to be certified platinum. Like it was certified gold within like a year, but it
Right.
wasn't until 2003 that it earned platinum status. That's their only platinum US album too. But I, yeah, no, absolutely. I got it back. I was trying to think. Yeah, I think it absolutely measures up. 1981 was just a strong year for rock albums, and certainly not just Kiss, but I mean Def Leppard had High and Dry. They were coming up and a force to be reckoned with. Um, Van Halen, well, okay.
I was just going to say that
Van
one.
Halen's Fair Warning was the poorest selling of the original six albums, but it's my favorite.
Mine too.
Yeah, and it's still a double or triple platinum album. It didn't sell 6 or 7 or 10 million.
Right.
But yeah, there was something was going on, and I got to throw out Y&T Earthshaker. Not a big album, but a great one. There was it was yeah, something was happening. I don't know. Bands were just gaining steam, or bands that had been around a while were just getting a second gear. I don't know what it was, but something was going on.
Yes, and you also had a reformed King Crimson with a pretty heavy album and Discipline too.
Yeah. Yeah, they were back at it. And, it was the first Rainbow album with Joel and Turner. Now, it's not my
Yes,
favorite of those albums, but they were starting to get airplay in the States. And another thing that was a big help in 1981, of course, was MTV. And
absolutely.
April Wine have the distinction of being the first Canadian act played on MTV. They got played that very first day. It was either Gypsy Queen or Just Between You and Me. It was from the Live in London home video, the concert video that had come out. But those two clips got played a lot.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew like a few of the first videos. Like I know, well, the first one was Video Killed a Radio Star, but I know a Pat Benatar video was
Yeah, You
played
Better
early.
Run was the second one. Yeah. Yeah,
Yes, and I remember,
there
I
was
think
Rod Stewart ones. There was
Todd Rundgren
Squeeze.
one too, right? Time Heals, maybe?
Yes, yeah, yeah. But if you look down through that list, you'll see April Wine on there quite a few times between those two songs. So yeah, very first Canadian act. That's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know who the second one would have been. I'm going to guess it was Triumph, because they had video
Makes
clips at a
sense.
time when not everybody did. So
Very good. Speaking of 1981, thinking about what a lot of people call a classic lineup here. Miles Goodwin was with the band from the beginning until when he passed.
yeah,
And he was their main songwriter. He was the straw that stirred the drink
yeah.
in that band. Who would you say was the secret weapon in that band, considering how many people had passed through?
Wow. Well, he's still in the band today, and it's Brian Greenway. I think that Brian was a huge boost to the band. They had great players before. I got to shout out the mighty Jerry Mercer on drums, one of the hardest hitting drummers I've ever seen in concert. And Jerry was born in 39. So
Oh, okay.
so Jerry had been kicking around for a long, long time. I mean, he was 42 when Nature of the Beast, or 41 and when Nature of the Beast. Certainly that's not old, but when a band just makes their first breakthrough, but he's one of the best. He was one of the best drummers in Canada and one of the hardest hitting. In the earliest year, well, not the earliest, but here's Jim Lynch, who was their second bass player. He was on Record,
Mhm.
Electric Jewels, and Stand Back, and then he left for a little while. He actually joined a later incarnation of BTO after Randy Bachman left that band.
Yes.
But Jim was a writer, good bass player, and a good co-lead vocalist. So if you listen on Record, you can hear a lot of Jim. You listen to Electric Jewels, you hear a lot of Jim. You don't hear him as much on Stand Back. Brian Greenway. Brian Greenway was a really important addition to April Wine. Not only did he give him the three guitar attack, but he was a talented writer, talented guitar player, and he was a capable vocalist in his own right. Even though Miles is the lead singer, it's always cool when you get those occasional songs that another vocalist takes the lead on once in a while. It just changes things up once in a while. And I think that's why these days he's the leader of April Wine. He's not an original member, but he's a senior member, and he's got a strong enough personality that he can lead a band. But yeah, I would say that Brian Greenway probably the second most important guy in April Wine for them, definitely of that classic lineup, the classic lineup that most people, identify, like, these five guys, right?
Right. So if you know the band, you know their biggest selling albums, probably their most enduring albums would be First Glance, Harder, Faster, Nature the Beast, maybe Power Play. Outside of those, what do you think is a April Wine album that not enough people know about, but they should give it a listen or perhaps purchase?
Okay, so outside of Canada, I would say Stand Back.
Okay.
It's the one where there's four of the guys in the band at the time. It's a black cover and they're standing behind a cannon. Um, that album was a really big album for them. I think at one time it was the biggest selling album by a Canadian band in Canada.
Oh,
And yeah, it was
okay.
a huge album. I probably, well, between Stand Back and the second album on Record, I probably see more used copies of those crate digging than any other April Wine albums, and that includes Harder, Faster, Nature of the Beast. So obviously, a lot of people bought those albums and rebought them and rebought them and rebought them. But Stand Back is a great rock slash hard rock album for 1975 that I wish that success it enjoyed in Canada was, I think it's like a four times platinum in Canada.
Okay.
It should have had similar success at least in the States, but um, and I think that the labels understood that because, like I said, originally that did come out in the U.S. on Big Tree Records, which was a small subsidiary of Atlantic Records. But in the early 80s, Atlantic reissued Stand Back. So it is possible to find Atlantic issues of Stand Back on vinyl and cassette. Um, so I think they realized that they probably said, well, this is a big album in Canada. Maybe people will start to pick this up. It didn't happen, but I really think it should have. I mean, the opening track on that album, Ooh, What a Night, starts off with the fire engine bells. It is an all-time rock classic. It is a staple here in Canada. As soon as that comes on, everybody knows what it is. Um, when I saw them earlier this year opening for Triumph, that was the opening song. And before the lights even came on, as soon as those bells came on, the audience was, it was so popular, it was even used in a lottery commercial up here. So it's just, by any
Wow.
other standards, it's a hit song, just not anywhere outside of Canada. So Stand Back would be a good, and it's a good album all the way through. Like not all of those early albums are consistent all the way through. Stand Back is a pretty listenable album from start to finish. Now there's two other ones that I will mention, and both of them are, I guess you could call them latter day albums. The first one is the first album I heard all the way through, and that is Attitude. And that came out in 1993. That was the first April Wine album to come out in 8 years. It was a reconfigured lineup. It's the heaviest album they've ever done. It actually certified gold in Canada, so it was a legit comeback. A couple songs got some radio play, and uh, unfortunately, they did not secure a U.S. deal for it. But I will say this: there is a track from that album called "That's Love," which was one of the singles that got enough airplay to reach 33 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock chart, which is pretty good for an import, pretty unheard of. So it's just too bad that they couldn't have re-signed with Capitol or gotten another label semi-interested in them. If nothing else, to make sure that there's more copies of it out there to find used. And the other album I want to mention is one that has grown on me over the years. The first time I listened to it when it was current, I didn't care as much for it, but I've really grown to like it. Came out in 2001, and it's called Back to the Mansion. And that is a really, really good album. It's not as heavy as the two 90s albums they did, but it's just good. Really good songs on that. And it came out on a small label, came and went. A shout out from Grant's Rock Warehouse because he did an entire series going through the entire April Wine catalog, and I
Yes.
participated, I think, in maybe all but one of them. And some of the panelists I brought over, like Dave Lubin, that are in the book. But I know that I introduced some of those latter day albums to people that otherwise wouldn't have heard them because the only way to get them is to get used copies or imports, unless you happen to find them used in a store, which is really weird. But I guarantee you, it came from somewhere in Canada because that's all the only place they were released. So yeah, I would say for early days, definitely check out Stand Back and definitely check out Attitude and Back to the Mansion. And I also want to say that those three albums sound nothing alike other than they're by the same band. So there's more variety there than I think most people would think. They probably think April Wine is just a three-chord heavy rock band, and a lot of their songs they're quite simple, easy to learn, but there's more to them than that.
So you mentioned Attitude. Let's talk about that song. That's Love.
Yeah.
Okay. That was released in 1993. You said those three albums all sounded different from each other. Now, 1993, grunge was all the wave here in the States. And I know grunge had a lot of popularity in Canada as well. And it hit that chart here in the States. Did they toughen up their sound by that point?
Yeah, they didn't go grunge,
Okay.
but they did get heavier. Like they discovered drop tuning on that album.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it was that was to accommodate voices, but it sure sounds good. and it's a self-produced album, but it sounds really, really good. By this time, Miles had become a really proficient producer. A lot of their albums are self-produced, and they're not the best sounding albums. You listen because you like the songs. But I've said this many times. Like the first three albums of the '80s, so there's Nature of the Beast, Power Play, and then Animal Grace. Those are all co-produced by Miles Goodwin and Mike Stone. And to me, none of them sound like Mike Stone albums at all. But
Right. Hmm.
but Attitude, yeah, I mean they toughened up a little bit. But I also think that Attitude, had it come out in '90 or '91, I think it might have done a little better because
Okay.
it kind of was out of time. Because they're still writing upbeat commercial rock songs with a mixture of ballads. So the fact that it went gold in Canada just says how, like they could have almost been one of those bands like Aerosmith or AC/DC that trends did not affect them. The fans are going to come out and support them no matter what. But it didn't, that period didn't last, unfortunately, but um, it's an album that I still go back and listen to and think, man, what a great record not just for a great comeback record, just what a great album to listen to.
Okay. So here's something that just popped in my head. Actually, it popped in my head before we signed on today, and I didn't have a chance to look it up at all. Did April Wine ever win a Juno Award?
You know what? I never looked it up because I don't tend to pay much attention to award shows.
Okay.
But my feeling is no, I don't think they did. I think April Wine were a band for the fans, and I don't think they were ever critically acclaimed or critics' darlings. Now I know that I want to say 2009, 2008, around that time, they did get inducted into the Juno Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Because there was a stretch there where like there were bands that I liked that were just kept getting inducted. So, I mean, I think Rush got inducted before, and then April Wine, and then Loverboy, and then I almost want to say Bob Rock as a producer
Okay.
got nominated. But so they may not have won any Junos, but they are in the Juno Hall of Fame. And I remember watching that ceremony. I think you can still find it on YouTube. Kim Mitchell inducted them, which was pretty cool.
Okay. Excellent. So you've now written four panel books and done three books on your own. What is the writing style like when you do these two kinds of books? Like what brings you the most satisfaction doing
Oh,
these books in these two separate ways?
I like them both. I like both methods for different reasons. Yeah, the Unspooled did have some contributions from some outside people, but yeah, a lot, I
That's
wrote
right.
I wrote more of that than the panel books. Other than I shouldn't say that. I mean, the panel books, I make the structure, the frame, and
Yes.
I do the outline, and the panel is painted in for me or color, whatever you want to call it. But I
Right.
like both methods. When I did my Sammy Hagar book, I always knew I wanted to do that myself because I'd been such a fan of his solo work and there'd never been a book about it. And I had so much that I wanted to say that I thought, I think I can do this on my own. Um, the Fleetwood Mac one was a real labor of love. It wasn't one that I had been planning on doing, as I've talked about many times, and that one lent itself to being one that I came into it because I was writing it for newcomers and I was still considering myself to be a newcomer myself. It made sense for me to write that one. I could have easily made that into a panel book. So I like when I write shorter, I get a lot of me out in them and I can just, it's cathartic because like these are points that I've always wanted to make about, I really think this is great because of, or because it did this and it did that and there was this going on. But the panel books are really great too because you do get all of these different viewpoints and you get fresh perspectives on albums that you've listened to for decades and songs that have been in your head for decades. All of a sudden you hear someone mention something that you never thought of before and now that's not all you can hear, but it's just another aspect of it and you learn to appreciate it more. Um, and also the content, it generates so much content so quickly that it fills, it's exciting. It's exciting when I know who I want to have in each chapter. I put out there, I get the responses, and as I start getting the responses in, whether I have to transcribe them or whether I just cut and paste and edit, once it starts filling out, that's exciting. That's like, yeah, okay, I'm starting to get a book here. There's a book forming, and it's, people are generating the content, So I like both approaches. For me, it really depends on who it's about, whether I think I've got enough to say about it on my own, or whether it's like, no, I want to open this up and get some other opinions on it. I could have done an April Wine book myself, but I really, kind of inspired by that show we did on Squares. I thought, there's enough fans out here. I'm going to see what I can do about getting fans to talk about each one of these albums because I think it's important. And it's really good because if it had just been me, say, writing about the debut album, it wouldn't have been a very positive chapter. But as we know, we've got people like Sydney that actually really enjoyed that book, and Mike Meadis that really enjoyed that book. So there's other perspectives that I never would have had because I guess I should know better than this by now, John, but I always thought it was generally considered, yeah, well, nobody really likes that first album except for Fast Train. And percentage wise, that's probably true, but it's not 100%. There are some people that find things to enjoy about that I never would have thought of before. I always found that a chore to listen to, and I probably still kind of do, but there's two or three other songs on there I'll give a second listen to now.
How important is it that you're a fan of the band before you approach writing a book about them or consider writing a book about them?
It's everything. I would never write a book about a band that I was not a fan of. I mean, I know enough about music that I probably could, but I don't think it would ring true, and I'd know it. I'd know it that if somebody came to me, we need a book about XYZ band. Not XYZ, but you know what I mean? Like about a band that like, I'm
Right,
not particularly a fan of theirs. It would be for a paycheck, you know?
right.
And um I get way more excited about talking about bands that I want more people to know about. That I've been listening to and enjoying for years and thinking and looking around. And when I hear people say that they like this band, this band, this band, and they never mention April Wine, I'm like, boy, I think you'd like April Wine if you heard them or if you heard more of them. And that's been, with the exception of the Fleetwood Mac book, that's been the driving force behind all of these books is to spread the word. And if I'm not spreading the word about the band themselves, I'm spreading the word about the fact that hey, they've got more than just the two or three really big albums. And by the way, some of the newer stuff they put out is some of the best stuff they've ever done, and it doesn't have a chance for radio play or wider recognition. And I want to try and shed some light on it. Now, unfortunately, in the case of April Wine, they're a band that I wish they had done more latter day albums. I really do. Because Miles is such a great songwriter that I think there were more April Wine albums in that band in some form or another. I just wish we'd heard more. There's only two albums in the 2000s, and it's been 20 years since the last one. So, but the fact remains is that they still have albums before they got big and they have albums after they were big that I don't think enough people know about. So a 16 album catalog, yeah, that's worth celebrating and that's worth talking about because the majority of it is really good.
No doubt about that. And as I've continued my April Wine journey, a lot of the earlier albums, maybe they go all over the place, but you seem to hear a few strong songs on every album throughout before you hit
Yeah.
the from first glance up through
Yep.
power play, which is my sweet spot. And then even checking out some of the latter day albums, like roughly speaking, same thing. I mean, there's differences in what you heard before. Maybe the production wasn't quite as strong, but it was the songs that ring true, and it's the songs that matter in the end.
Yeah, yeah, and April Wine productions are really all over the place.
Mhm. Yes.
They're kind of strange productions, some of them, and they've never, to my ears, they've never had the same sound for two albums in a row. Uh, and some of that is, I think some of that is changing technology as much as anything. You're really hearing year to year how recording techniques get more sophisticated, but you know, I mentioned Attitude again. Attitude, I think, is the first time in the studio that Jerry Mercer's drums have been captured the way they sound live. That's been one of the things. Like they could
Nice.
have the poppiest of songs, but with him slamming on the drums, they make them rock. And that's the secret to a lot of my favorite music. They're essentially pop songs dressed up as rock songs.
What would you say is their best recorded album?
Boy, Attitude's a good sounding album, for
Okay.
for an independent label and a self-produced album. I mean, most people I've always preferred Harder, Faster to Nature of the Beast. Those are their two big albums. I don't
Hmm.
think either of those albums are particularly well produced. I like the sound on Harder, Faster a lot better. And that was produced by Miles Goodwin and he's no longer with us. Well, neither of them are, but a producer named Nick Blagona, who you might recognize from, if you look up his credits. I think that's a good sounding album. It just doesn't sound as heavy as some of the songs are, but it's easy to listen to. So, but Stand Back for an early album, that's a good sounding album too. But ultimately, for my taste, I like the sound they got on Attitude quite a lot.
Very good.
Big loud, live sounding rock album.
Very good. This is on record, the April Wine album review. This is what we are discussing today here on my channel. So, to all of you out there, what is your favorite April Wine album? Have you seen them live? How well do you know their music? Are you just more of a casual fan like me? Have you been with them since the very beginning? Did you come in on First Glance or Stand Back or those mid to late 70s albums? Or did you just discover them later on when they were doing Attitude and Back to the Mansion, roughly speaking? What are your favorite tracks? And if you've purchased this book, what do you think of it? Please let us know in the comments. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about your latest book, which is a wonderful book that I'm really, really enjoying. And I'll probably have it finished off in the next week on record, the April Wine album review.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I always appreciate the
Thank you.
chance to promote the books. And yeah, it's hard to believe I have 7 books now, and I'm not stopping. I've got other things in the can, but yeah, for right now, I'm all about promo mode. So, appreciate the chance to have it on, and thank you for contributing.
You're welcome, and thank you for joining me today, and thank you for having me be a part of your book. Again, this is April Wine on record, the April Wine album review. You could find this along with all of Tim Durling's books on Amazon.com. They print them on demand. They will send them to you. And thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon.